And here, lo and behold, while I'm talking to you about mag lips, we got a fish on. Let's see if I can get him on the boat. Wow, he's going deep, really deep. All right, there it is. Boom, fish on. That was my third fish of the day on an orange trigger spoon on the Downrigger, about 20 feet deep, 18 to 20 feet deep, right at 1.8 miles an hour, and not bad, not a bad fish for the day. I'll take it. All right, so you guys have been watching the channel for a long time. You know that I really love fishing with the Downrigger. It's extremely versatile. I've been using a Downrigger for 20 years now, from ocean fishing, salmon fishing in the Northwest, and I've even used it in the Sacramento River fishing for salmon on anchor, and use a Downrigger to get like a quick fish or something down stationary. And it's extremely versatile, and although some of those methods aren't totally orthodox, they work really well. So I always have a Downrigger with me when I'm trout fishing. It's just a staple of what I do out here on the water, and I use it a lot of different ways. But I get a lot of questions on, hey, when you're kayaking, how does that work? It seems dangerous. It seems like you could get tangled. It seems complicated. So I wanted to just break down exactly how the Downrigger works for me in my kayak. So Downrigger is really simple. It's basically a heavy piece of line. In my case, I use 200-pound braided line on a spool that you hang a heavy weight off of and drop it down the side, and then you can put a line clip on it that allows you to clip your line on the Downrigger. You use the heavy weight to drop it down. You don't have the weight on your line, and when you get hit by a fish, theoretically the release will release your fishing line from the Downrigger line, and then all that's between you and the fish is your normal line gear, and you don't have any heavy weights or anything. You can adjust the depth on the fly. You can fish really shallow. You can also use them to fish really deep. Fishing out of the kayak with the Downrigger, there's a couple things you got to keep in mind. First of all, out of a boat, you'll probably use 10, 12, maybe a 15-pound weight, there's no harm or foul in doing that. I scale that way down in the kayak. I do not want a bowling ball hanging off the side of the kayak for a couple obvious reasons. First of all, besides the safety aspect of it, if it gets snagged on the bottom, it could easily hang up and capsize your kayak. You don't want that. The second thing is it totally changes the buoyancy of your boat. If you have a 12-pound weight hanging off the side of your kayak that's dragging 25 or maybe even 50 feet down, it'll always cause you to pull to the side that weight's hanging on. It acts as a rudder or a keel, and it's harder to track straight. So on my kayak, I use a 3-pound ball. Really simple. I can still get down really deep. I can still fish in the top third of the water column almost everywhere I go. Rarely have I run into a situation where I need more than a 3-pound ball. And it's just got a standard clip right on, like I said, the Dacron 200-pound line. Now, a lot of Downriggers come with a braided line, or excuse me, they come with a steel aircraft cable line. I don't like running that on my kayak, only because if this rubs on the side of the kayak, it doesn't leave any marks. It's not going to gouge the side of my boat. It also is a lot more flexible, so you can move it around a little bit, and there's just less chance of something bad happening, as opposed to, say, braided aircraft cable. That's just a little bit harder to work with. So my setup's really simple. I have a rod holder, a Scotty rod holder mounted on the side of my boat on the gunnel that's specifically for the Downrigger. It's always in the same spot. It's right here on my left side. I've got about 125 feet of line on it. Rarely do I use more than 30 or 40 depending on what you're doing, but occasionally we will drop down 80, 90, 100 feet, especially if you're targeting, say, landlocked salmon in a place like Orville or something like that. It's a manual Downrigger. You have to hand crank it. Roughly every turn's about a foot of depth, and that changes as you let out more line a little bit. But about 25 turns is 18 feet of depth for me. And it's really easy to keep track of that. You just count your turns down. So that's how I set my depth. So on the line, I use a Downrigger release. I like these little Scotties. They're cheap, they're easy, they work. It's the small form factor one. If you use the big form factor one, it works just as well. I just have a preference for the little ones. I don't really have a specific reason why. I've also used the Canon releases, which have a little bit different release mechanism. And a lot of guys swear by the Chamberlain releases. I've used those as well. Those are a little bit more complicated to use in the kayak. I like to keep it simple. This setup works really well for me. I've been using them for years and haven't had any problems. So when I'm ready to let my line out, the first thing I do is make sure that my Downrigger release is on the line, and I just clip it with the funny paper clip thing a couple inches above the ball, maybe right on the ball, a little bit above it, it doesn't really matter. And then I slowly let the ball into the water so that my Downrigger release is right at the surface. It's hanging right here off the side of the boat, easily accessible. I can grab it with my hand. I don't have to reach way over the side of the boat. It's right there. So I have a rod holder mounted on the right-hand side of my boat, and that's where my Downrigger rod goes. It looks a little awkward that it's coming across my body like this. The biggest reason I do it is because on a 7.5 foot rod, if it was mounted on the Downrigger or on the same side as the Downrigger, it's out there 2.5, 3 feet farther than it is now, and it's just a little bit harder to reach out and grab the line, a little bit harder to manage. I like it. I like a longer rod, but I like it a little bit shorter hanging off the side of the boat, so I put it on the opposite side. I can also see it very clearly in front of me. If I get a bite, I'm probably not going to miss it. So how do you let the line out? Real simple. This is one of Cal's signature rods, 7.5 foot rod, real simple. I have a threaded worm on a Dodger out there, and a Abu Garcia 5500 LC line counter reel. Standard reel we use 99% of the time for Downrigger applications and trolling applications. This also has a clicker on it, which is pretty convenient, and I use that on the Downrigger for a reason, so I'll show you how that works. So the first thing I do is I get my lure in the water. It's right off the side of the boat. I don't know if you can see it in the video or not, and I reset my line counter to 0. All right. Now I'm just going to release the spool and slowly start feeding out line, and it's taking line now. I'm watching the line counter. On a normal lake application in the kayak, my setback is usually somewhere around 50 feet. If there's a lot of boat traffic or you're somewhere shallow where maybe the boat would spook the fish, you might go back 100, but right now 50 feet is fine. So I'm at 60 just like that, pretty quick. And instead of closing the reel and locking it, I just turn on the clicker so it can still feed line. So my line's back there, it's just under the surface, 65 feet back in this case, and now I'm just going to grab the end of the line. The clicker's on, so I can pull line off the spool really easily. And I have the end of the line in my hand out here, and I just reach down, grab the clip, and set it in the clip. All right, so one thing you always have to make sure of is I have this paddle on this side of my boat, and every once in a while it'll hang in the paddle, so you just make sure that you're out away from your boat and your line's free and clear. Now all that's left to do is let the line down. Again, the spool is still open, basically unlocked. I can pull line off and the clicker's on. So I can get a little bit of speed. I usually like to be going, you need to be moving when you do this. You don't want to be stationary when you let your line out. For obvious reasons, it'll tangle like crazy behind you. So I'm going about 2 miles an hour. I'm going to go ahead and start releasing line. So I simply release the lock on the Downrigger and start reeling line out. And you'll see it pull the rod down, and when it gets to a certain point, it'll let out line on the clicker. That's pretty convenient. I'm counting turns. I'm 12 down right now. And at some point, about now, I start seeing it on my fish finder. I can actually see that 3-pound ball underneath me, and it is right at 26 feet deep. So my line's straight down 26 feet, back 65, and it's clipped to the Downrigger line. So at this point, I just reach forward, turn the handle of the reel till the reel closes or locks, and then I give it just a couple turns so that there's a nice bend in the rod. And at this point, I'll turn the clicker off. So now I'm fishing. I'm down 24 feet or so on the ball, and my line's 65 feet behind me, and I'm trolling, and I'm gonna go right about 1.5 miles an hour now and start trolling. I'm fishing, everything's golden. Now, when you get a bite, one of two things will happen. On a smaller fish with these releases, they don't typically release on the release. So the rod will just start jumping up and down, and you just take the rod out of the holder, give it a quick shake, and it'll release the downrigger release. And now your downrigger ball is just down there on its own. It's not connected to your gear anymore. Most of the time I'll leave it down until I retrieve the fish. If I'm really, really deep, then I might have to reel up the downrigger while I'm fighting the fish, because you don't want the fish or your fishing line to get wrapped around the downrigger line while it's down there. That just makes for a mess. So there's a little bit of finesse in fighting the fish and reeling up your downrigger. Most of the time I can leave it down there and not worry about it, especially when I'm only 25 feet deep, because the fish is way behind me. I'm well clear of my gear. It's not a problem. And with this setup at 1.5 miles an hour and this particular rig on, I have maybe a 10 or 15 degree of deflection angle. That means that the downrigger line is tilted back towards the back a little bit as I'm moving. If I speed up to 2 miles an hour, that's going to increase the deflection angle, which is going to decrease the depth to the surface. Not really a problem though, because I can constantly see a thin line on my fish finder where the ball is, and I know where that depth is. So if I speed up and I let out 20 feet of line and I'm only 16 feet deep, I know I can just let out a couple more turns to get that few feet I want to target the area you want. So it's a really simple setup. And like I said, I always use it. Even if I'm fishing only 6 to 8 feet deep, I'll still use a downrigger to get down rather than put weights in the line on my line. It's just a preferred method for me. Doesn't work for everybody that way. A lot of guys would rather have a little bit of weight on the line and not mess with all of that. But once you get it down and you've done it a few times, super simple, and it just works. It works fabulously. So hopefully I'll get a fish on and you get to see what happens when we pop the release on it and reel one in. Hasn't happened yet, so stay tuned for that. All right, so I trolled for a few minutes since I let my downrigger down just a second ago, and I'm out over deeper water, and I've had a couple marks right around 32 feet or so, and my gear's running right about 24, so I want to drop down a little deeper. It's really simple. With the downrigger, you can adjust your depth on the fly without having to go through the whole process of resetting if you do it right. And there's a couple things you have to keep in mind. The first thing I want to do is reach forward and turn the clicker on my reel. Okay, so that way when I release the bail to start letting more line out, or release the spool to start letting more line out, that bend in the rod's not going to whip up and cause a big backlash in the reel. It could also pop the clip down there. I don't really want to reel the thing all the way back up to reset it to go down a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the line so that bend in the rod doesn't pull any line off the reel, and release the reel. And now I'm just going to slowly, with the clicker on, feed it line, and you see my rod just comes right up straight. So there's no preload on the rod or the line anymore. It's still connected to the downrigger down there. So I can very easily just reach forward, release the brake, and I'm gonna let out 5 spools of line. And again, it's just gonna take it right off the reel like it did before. Keeping moving, that's a key. You don't wanna stop. I slowed down a little there, but I'm still keeping moving. And now I just reach forward, turn the crank a couple turns, put that bend back in the rod, turn off the clicker, boom, I just dropped down about 6 feet. I still see it on my sonar. I can see the definite line where my downrigger ball dropped down in the water column, and now I'm right around 31 feet, which is exactly where I want to be. So it's really simple to adjust depth. If you were to raise it up, same process, set the clicker, let the line tension out of the rod, and then just simply crank up your rod or your downrigger 4 or 5 turns. About every 5 feet, I'll go ahead and spool up the line onto the reel so that there's not a big bow and extra line down there. Go in 5 or 8 foot increments, and you can raise it as high as you want or go down as deep as you want. Super simple. So if you're interested in trying out a downrigger but don't want to make the investment to make the modifications to your kayak, or not sure if it's really for you or not, or maybe you're only an occasional trout fisherman and you target other species throughout the year and a few times a year target trout, there are a couple really snazzy DIY options for you to use for making your own downrigger. Really all you need is you can make it as simple as a piece of paracord with a knot tied in it, maybe every 5 or 10 feet to count feet. Make it 50 feet long with 5 or 8 knots in it, and put a weight on the bottom. Attach it to your kayak or your boat, put a clip on it. A standard downrigger clip will clip right on the paracord line, right above the weight, and you can hand line it up and down. It works okay. I've had a few buddies out on the water that didn't have downriggers when we were targeting stuff that the downrigger was required, kokanee, salmon, line lock salmon, that kind of things. That works okay. It's pretty tiring to thought I had a bite. It's pretty tiring to hand crank that thing up and down all day, or hand line it up and down. And then you have a big spool of line at your feet also, which in the kayak is kind of a problem. In a boat, not so much, but it's doable. So that's an easy way to try it, see what you think. The other option is you can take a saltwater spool, a large like 6500 or 7500 series spool, an old pin, whatever you have laying around. Spool it up with a 150 or 200 pound braid. You probably need 150 to 200 feet of it, even though you might only use 50 of that. And you can put it on a broken rod, or you can take a 2-piece rod and just take the second piece off. A pretty stout rod would be ideal. You don't want to use a flimsy light rod, but put the reel on that. Put a weight on the bottom. 2 to 3 pounds is plenty. You can go lighter if you don't feel comfortable with that much weight even to start off. Put the downrigger clip just above the line, above the weight. Mount it in a rod holder, which you probably already have, and boom, you have a downrigger. And if you have a line counter reel that you use for that, it's even more ideal because you have a way of counting how much line you have out right there on the reel, which is pretty convenient. Super simple, super cheap way. You probably have all the pieces to put it together in your arsenal now. I always save broken rods for exactly that reason. It's really easy to make a makeshift downrigger out of one if you needed to. It's a good loaner setup if you're out fishing with someone that doesn't have a downrigger, and it works really well. So you don't have to make the investment in a full setup to try it out and see what you think. Although this particular setup is not very expensive. I'm probably less than $100 into the weight, the clips, and the downrigger itself mounted on the kayak. So once you get dialed in, I think that's the optimum way to go. But certainly try the DIY option if you'd like, and you can at least see how it works. But that's Downrigger 101 in a kayak. If you have any questions, let us know. We use them all the time, and they're just a staple of everything we do on the water. All right, talk to you guys soon. Take care. Go.
Do you want results next time you go trout fishing? Get yourself a set of trigger spoons and put a limit on the stringer. They flat out produce.